Let's start off our Bible lesson today with a review of our PCA catechisms. So the question asks us, what has God given us to teach us how we should love, glorify, and enjoy Him? And your answer should be, God has given us His Word contained in the Bible, both Old and New Testaments, as the only rule to teach us how we should love, glorify, and enjoy Him. All right, moving on next to our books of the Bible on this week. It starts with Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, and Nahum. Again, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Yesterday in Bible, we discussed how Abraham, he was now a lot older. He's about 140 around this time because Isaac, his son, is 40 years old at this time. And Sarah unfortunately, she died. She passed away. And so Abraham knew that, soon he would die. And so he didn't want to die without passing down the blessing to his son, Isaac. So he made sure that he found a wife for Isaac first before he would give him the blessing and before he would pass away. So Abraham decided to get his servant Eliezer to go and find Isaac a wife. And so Abraham told his servant, he said, I want you to go back to my hometown because I don't want Isaac to marry any of the women that live here in the land of Canaan. Go back to my hometown, find someone for my family, and that is who he should marry. And so Eliezer, he knew that this was a big job that he was required to do. And so he made sure that he prayed about it, and he sought the Lord to make sure that he found the correct wife, the right wife, not who he thought was perfect, but the woman that God would choose for Isaac. Eliezer began his journey to Abraham's hometown. Remember, he packed his camels, he packed a lot of jewelry and all kinds of stuff to give to the woman that would be chosen as the wife for Isaac. And so he journeyed, and when he arrived there, he arrived at the well, which was perfect because in Bible days, the women would often go to the well to get water. And so he knew he would run into some of the women that lived in the town. And so he was like, okay, I think I'll find the perfect woman here. But he didn't want to choose who he thought was best. So he asked God for what was called a sign. He asked God to show him. And so he said, Lord, whichever woman comes to the well and offers me and my camels water to drink, she offers to get water, then she is the woman who you have chosen to be the wife for Isaac. So sure enough, the first woman that comes up to the well, she offers not only him water, but also his camels. And so Eliezer was so joyful because God had answered his prayer. That quick, the Lord had responded and showed him who would be the perfect wife for Isaac. So this woman came and she gave water to him and his camels. And so Eliezer began to question her. He said, hi, what's your name? And she said her name was Rebecca. And after he talked with her, he found out that she was actually from the family of Abraham. Nahor was her father. And so that was perfect because that was Abraham's brother. So this was perfect. So Eliezer, he ended up going to their house and he told her brother Laban and her father Nahor why he was there. And so they asked Rebecca if she was willing to go to the promised land, the land of Canaan, to marry Isaac. Remember, she had never met Isaac. She didn't know who he was. She hadn't even been to the land of Canaan before, but Rebecca was willing and she said yes. So she got all the jewelry and all of that. So her and Eliezer, they journeyed back to the promised land, and there she met Isaac and they got married, Isaac and Rebecca. So now Isaac has a wife. Isaac and Rebecca are now married. And so after some years passed, Abraham died as well, and he was 175 when he died. And so he had a really long life. The Lord had blessed him tremendously. And so Abraham, before he died, though, he made sure to pass on the blessing. And so what is the blessing? If you remember the promise that God gave to Abraham, that the land would be his and that God would multiply him and increase him. Remember, Abraham had a lot of animals. He had servants, all of that. That was all of Abraham's stuff. And so he passed all of that down to his son Isaac. when he passed away. That's what they did in Bible days. Before the father died, he would pass down the blessing, all his stuff that he had, to his firstborn son. And so Abraham, he did that to Isaac. So now Isaac is carrying the blessing. That's why whenever we say the God of Abraham, Isaac, yeah, that's why we say that, because that's the order that the blessing was passed down. So Isaac was married to Rebekah. Remember, Isaac was 40 years old when they got married. And so for many years, they wanted to have children, but they didn't. But finally, God had answered their prayer. After 20 years of them being married, God had finally answered their prayer to give them a child. And not only did God give them one, but God blessed Isaac and Rebekah with twins. Twins are like two babies born at the same time. And so God had blessed them to have these two sons. And when the sons were born, they named them Esau and Jacob. Although they were twins, Esau and Jacob were totally different from one another. Esau, he was the older twin. He was born first, and he was red and hairy. His name Esau actually meant red. And then Jacob, he's the younger twin. He was, regular looking. They were darker skinned and all of that. He looked regular. So just before the twins were born, God had given a promise to Rebekah. And he told Rebekah, he said, these two sons, he said, the older one, Esau, would serve the younger one, Jacob. And now we know whenever we have siblings, for those who have siblings, if you are the oldest or if you have an older sibling, usually you respect your older sibling and, you serve them, you listen to them. I'm sure your parents may put your older sibling in charge sometimes. But in this case, God had did something different. And he wasn't talking about like that. He meant when it came down to giving the blessing. Remember, I told you that Abraham gave the blessing to Isaac. Well, whenever it would be time for Isaac to bless his son, Esau would be rightfully the son to get the blessing because Esau was the older brother. But in this case, God said Jacob would get the blessing, that God would pass the blessing down to Jacob. And Jacob was the younger, so that was something different that God was doing. Usually the older son would get the blessing, but in this case, God said, no, Esau, he's the oldest, but he will not get the blessing. Jacob will receive the blessing. And so Rebekah knew this, and of course she told her husband Isaac the promise that God had given to them. And so to show this, when the sons were born, right after Jacob was born, because remember, Esau was born first and then Jacob came after him. When Jacob was being born, he actually grabbed the heel of Esau, like his foot, that kind of like symbolized that Jacob would actually, he would rule over Esau, just like God had promised.